All right, guys. So for today, we're gonna move into what we call reasoning. There's inductive and deductive reasoning. Ladies, inductive. What inductive is? It's kind of like your project from yesterday. Try to look for a pattern. Try to look for a pattern, and based on the pattern, find out what's going to happen in the future. Right. So yesterday, I said you guys needed to think. So that was inductive reasoning. Another term of inductive reasoning is what we have called sequences. Sometimes on the sequences we're doing addition. Like my example number one, from 4 to become 6, seems like I'm adding 2. From 6 to become 8, it seems like I'm adding 2. From 8 to become 10, seems like I'm adding 2. So I'm going to say, seems like each time I add 2. So the next number in this sequence, I'm going to call it 12 because I'm going to add 2 to my last term. But sometimes adding is not what we do. Like if I look at question number 2, from -2 to become -4, it seems like I subtracted 2. But from -4 to -8, I did not subtract 2. So sometimes adding is not what works. Sometimes it might be multiplying. In this case, I multiply by 2 each time. So my next number, I'm going to say will be -32 because I multiplied 2 to the last term. Right? And this is, once again, this is what we call sequence. We're looking for a pattern, and then we're saying based on the pattern, things are going to happen. You guys are going to get a little more in depth in algebra 2. When you guys doing addition, they're going to call it arithmetic sequence. So you're doing addition. And then for multiplication, they're even going to call it geometric sequence, which is multiplying. And they're even going to give you guys formulas that it might come and say, give me the 50th term. Like we can do it 50 times, but it's going to be a lot of work. So they're going to give you guys formulas. They're going to get more detailed in algebra 2. But once again, in geometry, we're looking at inductive. Inductive reasoning is we're looking for patterns. So this is how we do inductive. Or like yesterday on your project, that was inductive reasoning. Any questions so far? Now, we also have what we call deductive. And deductive, we're going to be using words. And for deductive, we're going to start with a conditional statement. And we call the conditional statement, they have the if and the then part. The if is my condition, and my then is what has to happen. So we call those conditional statement because we're giving you a condition. Now, the if is the conditional part, but the if part is not always at the beginning. Because instead of writing, if you pass geometry, then you will go to Disneyland, I could have said, you will go to Disneyland if you pass geometry. So the if part is always the condition. It doesn't have to be at the beginning, it's somewhere in there, right? But that's the if part. Because once again, I could have written that as, you will go to Disneyland if you pass geometry. Now, my second statement, I'm saying Josue gets a B in geometry. So that means he passed geometry. Now, the conclusion of this, I'm going to write Josue will go to Disneyland. For deductive reasoning, we're giving you guys a condition. So my first statement is a conditional statement, but then we're telling you something happens. But the condition, the if part has to happen. If instead of Josue gets a B in geometry, if I came in and say Josue gets an F, then I don't know if he goes to Disneyland or not. Right? Because the condition is if you pass geometry. Another thing, if I just said Josue went to Six Flags, I have no idea what happened to Disneyland. Right? I just know that he went to Six Flags. Right? We okay with these? Now, still in deductive reasoning. So notice for deductive, I'm using words. We're going to get into numbers for deductive, but right now I just want to stay in words. We're going to come and say something that we call the logical chain. Let me minimize this so we can actually see the whole thing. For logical chain, I'm going to give you guys conditional statements. If you notice, all of them have the if and the then part. So I'm going to give you guys conditional statements, but I want you guys to tell me which one happened first. If I look at, for example, number 2 or example B, the second one, Well, the first one says if you pass geometry, then you will go to Disneyland. The second one says if you do your homework, then you will pass geometry. So I noticed that the end of B is the beginning of A. So that's how I know which one comes first. I'm going to say B comes right before A because the way B ends, it's how A starts. So the way one conditional statement ends, that's how the next one is going to start. Does that make sense? So if I even take a look even more, I look at example C, it finishes with you will have your priorities straight. I'm looking at the ending of C, and I notice that that's the beginning of D. So I'm going to say C comes right before D because the way one statement ends is how the next one is going to start. Even more, I notice that the way D finishes, you will do your homework, is the beginning of B. See that? The beginning of D is the beginning of B. So I know D comes right before B. So now to put them in order, I know that C comes right before D, right? Because the way C ends is how D starts. But I also know, based on my green stuff, that D comes right before B. So right after D, I'm going to have B. And then right after B, because see how I'm using colors, how B ends in red? Right after B, I'm going to have A. So the way one statement ends is how the next one is going to start. I used different colors so we can kind of see. I used the red because B ends in red, and that's how A starts. So that's why I said B comes right before A. I used the blue to say, well, the way C ends is the way D starts. So I knew that C was right before D. And then lastly, I saw how D ended, and that's how B started. So that's how I know that D comes right before B. So for logical chain, I'm gonna give you guys statements, and then you have to tell me which order they go. Make sure whenever you guys do type it, make sure there's a space after the comma. None of them will be capitalized. Good question, thank you. Just none of them capitalized, just a space after the comma. Otherwise, it's gonna mark it wrong. Any questions? No. All right, let's stop this. Yes.